The Orville Series 1, Episode 1 review. Okay, so it's a little bit late. I haven't had access to the Orville. I found out sort of about the Orville when I started doing my Discovery reviews about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago. And watched a couple of reviews of people's on YouTube and thought it sounds quite good, but couldn't actually find anything where I could watch it in sort of decent quality. I now have that. Right, just quickly, to anyone who hasn't seen Orville or knows anything about Orville, basically it's a Star Trek-esque TV series with Seth MacFarlane as the captain of the Orville, which is an exploration ship. And in essence, it's a sort of, like I say, Star Trek sort of based. It's not Star Trek, but you can clearly see that Star Trek's massively influenced it. But with a sort of a bit of a tongue-in-cheek approach to the whole thing. It's a little bit more sort of comical Star Trek, although they're not being too silly or anything. It's not constant, silly little sort of Family Guy gags. But in essence, if you sort of kind of imagine Next Generation and kind of going more off in that sort of softest approach to Star Trek, it's more like that. I was a little bit concerned with Seth MacFarlane being in it. I like the guy. I've enjoyed a lot of his Family Guy and American Dad and all of those things. But to be honest, I have started to go off them a little bit over more recent years. Some of his more modern stuff I found, for me, the jokes don't hit home quite so much. And some of them are just a little bit uncomfortable to watch, to be honest. They're just a bit too extreme. Maybe that's just me becoming an old man. I don't know. So I had slight reservations with him being in this and obviously him having a sort of a pretty big degree of influence on it as well. That all said, that intrepidation was probably misplaced, to be honest, because other than a little bit with a banana scene, not so much to do with the banana, but there was a few jokes just around there towards the sort of last third of the episode where the jokes felt a bit Seth MacFarlane, a bit Family Guy, and I didn't really like them. Beyond that, the rest of it was actually pretty good, and there was a few jokes that weren't too bad. So just going quickly into the episode, in essence, we meet our crew, who consist of your sort of traditional-ish Star Trek-ish characters. They're sort of ticking quite a few boxes. You could argue that Spock or Data's possibly been sort of split up into sort of 3 characters or whatever. But these guys all seem quite interesting, and they've got their different attributes and stuff that they offer. The 2 helmsmen, I think, are going to be quite funny. They had quite a few good sort of one-liners and stuff throughout it. I think these 2 guys are going to be pretty funny throughout the series. We'll see, but yeah, I think those 2 are pretty good. And so yeah, the other bit that I was maybe a bit concerned about, seeing that Seth MacFarlane's ex-wife, who would seem was basically cheating on him. That was sort of the opening episode of the series, and he's kind of gone through some shit over the last 12 months before he's been granted this commission of the Orville ship. She's now going to be his second in command. And I sort of thought that might be a little bit painful. But again, actually, that's worked not too bad so far. Some of the jokes and stuff have actually been quite good. And it is quite an interesting concept if you sort of think, well, you know, what would it be like if the 2 sort of senior officers on board a ship would actually be, ex-husband and wife? That is quite interesting. We'll see how those jokes go. We learn later on in the episode that actually the reason Seth has got the commission to be the captain of the Orville is because she's pulled a few strings at the academy or whatever it is to get him this position. So actually it was her that got this role for him. He doesn't know that. I assume we'll probably find out later on and he'll become resentful or whatever there may be. But all of that and all of the cast and the crew and stuff that we sort of meet in this episode, I like, and I think that they're all interesting enough that we can build on. And like I say, it hasn't been too stupid. Going into how it all looks and everything, yeah, it's obviously it's not quite got the budget of Discovery, but still it all looks pretty decent. It holds up. In terms of that sort of Star Trek universe, it's not, as far as I'm aware, officially a Star Trek franchise. Obviously, it doesn't have Star Trek in the title, but there's no avoiding the fact that Star Trek has clearly been a degree of inspiration, and we know that. We know Seth MacFarlane loves Star Trek, and we know that that's what this is about. And it's nice to have this sort of, if we look at comparing it to Discovery just very briefly, it's a much sort of softer, friendlier approach to the Star Trek franchise, as opposed to Discovery's gone quite sort of grown up and serious and fairly dark in places, to be honest. Orville, from what I've seen of episode 1, doesn't have the dark thing. It kind of has more of that Next Generation feel, to be honest. Now, just quickly going into the episode and having a quick look at what happens in the episode. Like I say, we meet the crew, we move on from there. Basically, the Orville gets called out to a planet who turns out needs their help because they created this device that basically can kind of create a bubble and fast forward things in time. So, in essence, make things grow, like a tree can grow like that. And the idea is that you can sort of basically solve world hunger, or not world hunger, universal hunger, and there's all sorts of things it offers, but it also offers other things in terms of it being used as a weapon and being able to do various other things like that. And this is where we then meet I assume probably one of the consecutive or consistent enemies throughout the series, which is the Krill. Again, they all look pretty good and stuff. It all moves around pretty well, and we had a little sort of shootout where they land on the planet trying to steal this device, and our Orville team basically needs to get it off the planet and up to the Orville. And all of that, the action and stuff, it's not sort of, incredible, but it's all fine. It all works perfectly fine. To be honest, quite often when we look back at various sci-fi series over the decades, quite a lot of the action and stuff, especially when we have little shootouts and stuff, isn't that impressive. And they certainly get down that sort of Star Trek Next Generation and Voyager and Deep Space Nine to an extent way of combat, which is to just basically sort of go, and that's the job done. You don't need to really take too much cover because, you're the good guys, so it's all right, but the bad guys, you'll hit. So yeah, there's my sort of quick roundup of the episode. Obviously, it's all a little bit late. I should have done these months ago. I'm going to be watching the whole series, so I'll be doing a little review of every episode. So like I say, I've enjoyed this so far. My slight sort of reservations towards it, I think, have been somewhat unfounded up to this point. We'll see how it progresses. In terms of, like I say, imagery and all of that, it looks good, it feels good, the script's not too bad. Some of the characters are pretty funny already, and some of them are reasonably interesting as well, so that's all good. So in terms of my final score for this episode, like I say, I enjoyed it. It didn't sort of stand out as anything too incredible or anything like that. So I'll give it a nice sort of rounded 7 out of 10, and look forward to watching episode 2.